Why is it that national parks and forests are just so creepy and terrifying? I mean, between missing hikers and cover-ups and strange paranormal phenomenon and sightings of humanoids and other strange things, it seems like these places have no shortage of the strange and unexplained. And in today's episode, I'll be sharing with you 17 stories of strange things going in and on and around our national forest and parks. So, without further ado, get ready, here you go. I was camping with my family in Yellowstone National Park last summer. We had set up our tent near the Yellowstone River in the Hayden Valley area. It was July 12th, 2023. My wife was reading inside the tent while I sat outside with the kids roasting marshmallows over the fire pit as the sun went down. As it got darker, I started hearing this low rumbling noise coming from the direction of the river. At first, I thought maybe it was the sound of a big tour bus driving on the park road in the distance. But the rumbling just kept going and seemed to be getting louder and more intense. The noise was so powerful, it made the ground slightly vibrate underneath us. My kids got scared and came over to me saying, "Dad, what's that scary noise?" I told them not to worry, but I was starting to feel uneasy myself. The rumbling became deafening, shaking our tent violently. Then I looked over at the Yellowstone River and saw the water violently sloshing and crashing against the banks, like it was being disturbed by something huge underwater. That's when bright lights started appearing above the river, moving erratically back and forth. They were reddish-orange in color, and there were several of them, some bigger than others, hovering 20 to 30 feet above the water's surface. I first thought they must be search and rescue helicopters, but they made no sound and their movements were too strange. As I stood there dumbfounded, one of the larger bright orange lights broke off from the others and came right towards our campsite. It got as close as 100 yards away when it just stopped, hovering silently and pulsating this eerie reddish glow. I grabbed my son and daughter and pulled them in close, not knowing what this thing was or what it might do next. The three of us stood there petrified, staring at this luminous object that seemed to be studying us. My wife started screaming from inside the tent for me to get them away from there. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of red light, and nothing. I don't know what happened or how much time had passed, but when I came to, I was lying on the ground and my wife was shaking me, saying the kids, and I had been gone for almost an hour. She said she saw a bright red flash of light from outside, and then we had just vanished without a trace until now. I had a pounding headache and felt incredibly nauseous and weak, like I was recovering from the worst case of flu ever. My kids seemed dazed and terrified, but unharmed. We grabbed our stuff and got out of there as fast as we could, making it out of Yellowstone and back home. I swore I'd never set foot in that park again after what happened. I still have no idea what we encountered that night, or what it did to us. But I'll never forget that deep rumbling and those strange red lights over the river. Whatever they were definitely not of this world. This incident took place a few years ago while I was camping with my family at Yosemite National Park in California. We had rented a cabin near the edge of the park for a week-long vacation. My wife, 2 kids, and I love spending time in the outdoors, so we were really looking forward to hiking the trails and taking in the natural beauty of the area. One night, after we had finished roasting marshmallows around the campfire, the kids went inside to get ready for bed while my wife and I stayed outside for a little longer. As we were cleaning up, I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw this strange, almost rectangular shape hovering about 5 feet above us. It seemed to be made up of some kind of shimmering or static-like energy. At first, I thought my eyes were just playing tricks on me from staring into the fire, but as I kept watching, the shape remained. It wasn't moving, just hovering there silently. An uneasy feeling started to creep over me. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but there was something ominous about this strange phenomenon. I nudged my wife and pointed it out to her. She froze, staring at it with a mix of curiosity and fear on her face. We stood there motionless for what felt like an eternity, neither of us wanting to be the first to break the strange silence surrounding us and this bizarre apparition. Finally, I decided we needed to get inside. As calmly as I could, I suggested to my wife that we go check on the kids. She nodded slowly, still transfixed by the sight above us. I took her hand and led her towards the cabin, glancing upwards periodically to make sure the strange shape wasn't following or moving towards us. Once inside, I locked the door behind us and drew all the curtains. My wife and I didn't sleep much that night, too unsettled by what we had witnessed. In the morning, there was no sign that anything unusual had occurred, but I knew what I saw was real. To this day, I have no idea what that strange shape or energy field hovering above our cabin was, but I'll never forget the feeling of dread it injected in me. It was the summer of 2002. I was 42 years old at the time and had been working as a forest ranger in the Manistee National Forest for nearly 15 years. There was a small wildfire that had broken out in a remote area of the forest that July. We were still in the early stages of containing it when this strange incident occurred. That morning, I reported to the command post to receive my assignment for the day. They tasked me and another ranger with driving the perimeter roads to search for any wildlife that may have been injured or overcome by the smoke. Our job was to load up any animals we found and transport them back to the wildlife rescue team at the command post. They would provide veterinary treatment and euthanize any creatures that were too far gone to survive. So, my partner and I set off, heading west along the dirt roads at a pretty good clip, faster than we probably should have been. I was chatting with him, not really paying attention to my speed. Suddenly, from out of the trees to my left, a large, dark figure came loping out on all fours, passing right in front of my truck. I slammed into it hard with the front left tire, then felt the back tire roll over it as well. I was in a lifted Ford F-250 pickup. At the speed I was going, I was sure I had killed whatever it was. Our first thought was that I had hit a bear. We jumped out to load the carcass into the bed of the truck. But as we approached it, we quickly realized this was no bear. The creature was roughly 6 to 7 feet tall, humanoid in shape with arms, legs, hands, and feet much like a person, but covered in dark hair. The hair was longer, around 4 to 5 inches, on the head, arms, and legs, shorter on the torso. This thing was solid muscle, built like a linebacker. I had run over it basically across the upper back and shoulder area. When we rolled it over, I could see its jaw was broken and mangled from the impact. It had an elongated snout, reminding me of a baboon or the Hollywood depiction of a werewolf, but it had forward-facing eyes like a person. Overall, it resembled a muscular, hairy humanoid with some ape-like features. We immediately called it in to the command post. Within 15 minutes, a couple officials from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources arrived on scene. They seemed as baffled as we were. The 4 of us managed to hoist this 350 to 400 pound dead weight into their vehicle. They said they'd try to identify it and get back to us. We were told to return to give a report on what happened. Around 10 minutes after we got back and started filling out an incident report, we were interrupted and told some government people were on their way to talk to us. Sure enough, within an hour, two serious-looking men in suits showed up. They took us out to my truck and asked me to show them precisely where I hit this thing. They collected blood and hair samples from under my truck. Then, they asked us to get into their vehicle and drive them out to the location, which we did. It was an uncomfortable, mostly silent ride. When we arrived, I walked them through the whole event, step by step. After I finished, the man who seemed to be in charge turned to us and said, matter-of-factly, "Congratulations, you hit a bear." When I started to object that this was definitely not a bear, he cut me off. "You're not listening. You hit a bear, and that's what you'll tell anyone who asks about this. There will be serious consequences if you say otherwise. Legal charges, loss of your job, and pension. We'll make sure no one believes you. So once again, you hit a bear. Are we clear?" Me and my partner looked at each other and realized we had no choice but to agree. On the drive back, the reality set in that I was now part of a real government cover-up. They knew exactly what I had run over. They had encountered these things before. Now they had a body, and for some reason, they were determined to keep the existence of these creatures hidden. I'm coming forward with this now in the hopes that my partner or those two DNR officials will back me up. I figure they can't silence all of us as easily as they could one. The public has a right to know these creatures are out there in our forests, and our government is aware of them. That's the gist of my experience. Let me know if you have any other questions. Hey everyone, I wanted to share a bizarre experience I had last summer while camping in the Chattahoochee National Forest. I'm hoping someone might have some insights or similar stories to share. So, my girlfriend and I decided to take a weekend camping trip to get away from the city life. We found a secluded spot near a small lake and set up our tent. The first day went by without any issues, and we enjoyed hiking and exploring the area. On the second night, I woke up around 1 a.m. to the sound of something walking around our tent. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal, but then I heard what sounded like a person whispering right outside the tent. It was a deep, raspy voice that I couldn't quite make out. I nudged my girlfriend, and she heard it too. We were both freaked out, but I decided to peek outside the tent. When I did, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing at the edge of our campsite. It was hard to tell in the darkness, but it looked like it was wearing some kind of animal skin or fur. The figure then let out this bone-chilling laugh that sounded almost inhuman. I quickly zipped the tent back up, and we stayed huddled inside, too scared to make a sound. We could hear the figure moving around our campsite, and at one point, it sounded like it was sniffing and scratching at the tent. This went on for what felt like hours, until eventually the sounds faded away. When the sun came up, we packed up our stuff and got the hell out of there. We didn't see any tracks or signs of what had been stalking us in the night. I've never had an experience like this before, and I'm not sure what to make of it. Could it have been a skinwalker? Or some other paranormal entity? Or just some creep messing with us? Has anyone else had a similar encounter in the Chattahoochee National Forest? One possibility that keeps coming up is that it could have been a skinwalker. From what I've read, skinwalkers are shape-shifting witches in Navajo folklore that can take on the form of animals or humans. They're said to often wear animal skins or pelts, which would fit with the figure I saw outside our tent. Another thing that makes me think it could have been a skinwalker is the laugh we heard. It wasn't a normal human laugh. It was this deep, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the woods. I've read that skinwalkers are known for making all sorts of unnatural noises, from animal calls to human-like voices. I know the idea of a skinwalker in Georgia might seem far-fetched, given that they're usually associated with the Southwest, but who's to say they couldn't exist in other parts of the country? The Chattahoochee National Forest has a long history of Native American presence, so it's not impossible that some of their legends and folklore could have taken root there. Of course, I can't say for certain that it was a skinwalker. It could have been a wendigo, a fleshgate, or some other creature from folklore or urban legend. Or, as much as I don't want to believe it, it could have been a real person wearing animal skins and messing with us for some twisted reason. All I know is that the experience felt deeply unnatural and left both my girlfriend and me with a lingering sense of unease. We're both experienced campers and have spent plenty of nights in the woods, but neither of us has ever encountered anything like this before. After we got back from the trip, my girlfriend and I started talking more about what happened. That's when she told me about a similar experience she had years ago, back when she was in college. She was on a road trip with some friends driving through the Four Corners region. They were passing through the Navajo Nation at night when they stopped at a rest area to use the bathroom. My girlfriend said she had a strange feeling as soon as she got out of the car, like they were being watched. As she was walking to the restroom, she heard what sounded like a coyote howling in the distance. But then, the howl changed, becoming more human-like. She said it sounded like a person screaming in pain or anger. She ran back to the car, and they quickly drove away. At the time, she didn't think much of it beyond being a scary experience. But after our encounter in the Chattahoochee National Forest, she started researching skinwalkers and came across stories of them mimicking human voices or animal sounds. The description matched what she had heard at the rest stop all those years ago. It's a bit of a stretch, I know, but the similarities between our experiences are hard to ignore. Both involved hearing strange, unnatural sounds late at night, and the feeling that we had encountered something beyond the normal world. I've also been thinking about the laugh I heard outside our tent. It was so distinct and unsettling, and I can't shake the feeling that it was somehow mocking us. From what I've read, skinwalkers are often described as malevolent tricksters who take pleasure in frightening people. Again, I can't say for certain that what we encountered was a skinwalker, but the more I research and think about it, the more it seems like a plausible explanation. I'm just grateful that whatever it was didn't harm us physically, though the psychological effects have been long-lasting. In the summer of 2017, my friends and I went camping in Glacier National Park, Montana. We scored a backcountry permit to hike into the remote Belly River area. The trail followed the river through a densely forested valley between towering mountain peaks. We set up our tents at a sweet little campsite right along the river's edge. On our second night there, I woke up around 3 a.m., needing to relieve myself. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the crisp night air. The valley was illuminated by bright moonlight, reflecting off the glaciers high above. As I wandered a short distance away to find a private spot, I caught some movement out of the corner of my eye. Looking over, I was utterly shocked to see an 8-foot-tall hairy bipedal creature standing about 50 yards away. It looked right at me with intelligent eyes and let out a bone-chilling growl. It started taking slow, lumbering steps toward me, seeming curious but also threatening. I was paralyzed by fear for a few moments before turning and bolting back to the tent as fast as I could. I woke my friends up screaming about the Sasquatch. They thought I was messing with them at first, until the creature let out another terrifying growl, seemingly very close by. We all tensed up as we heard large, snapping footsteps getting closer and closer to our tent. The footsteps slowly faded into the distance. We were far too spooked to sleep the rest of the night. As soon as it got light out, we quickly broke down camp and got the hell out of there. I've spent countless nights outdoors, but I've never experienced anything as frightening as coming face to face with that massive hairy beast in the Montana wilderness. I know what I saw. My wife and I were hiking on one of the trails in Yellowstone National Park back in July 2022. We'd been out for a few hours, enjoying the beautiful scenery and wildlife sightings. As we came around a bend, we noticed two figures standing perfectly still up ahead, almost blending into the trees. At first, we thought they were just other hikers, but as we got closer, something seemed really off about them. They were dressed in these bizarre, old-fashioned suits that looked almost Victorian era, but the material didn't seem like normal clothing. It was more like their whole bodies were made of that same dark fabric, and their faces were completely blank. No eyes, nose, or mouth that we could make out. Just these smooth, featureless circles where faces should be. We stopped dead in our tracks, just staring at them. An incredible feeling of dread came over me, like we'd just stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to see. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or so, one of the figures slowly turned its blank face towards us. At that point, we just turned and quickly, yet calmly, walked back the way we came. We didn't say a word to each other until we were a good distance away. Everything around us seemed to become muffled and distant. The only sounds were our footsteps and heartbeats pounding in our ears. When we finally felt far enough away, we broke into a jog, then a run, not stopping until we reached the trailhead parking lot. We got in the car and drove away, still not speaking for several miles until the shock started to wear off. I don't know what we saw out there, but it was unlike anything I could explain or comprehend. We haven't been back to that trail since, and I'm not sure we ever will. Sometimes it's better to just let certain things lie. I have a deep love for fly fishing and try to get out to Yellowstone National Park as often as I can to pursue my passion. The rivers and streams there are legendary for their trout, and I relish the chance to test my skills against these wily fish in such a pristine, gorgeous setting. During my decades of solo angling adventures in the park, I've certainly had my fair share of unusual experiences out in those remote backcountry areas, but a couple of them definitely stood out as what I would consider to be very real encounters. It was the summer of 2018, and I had hiked about 3 miles off the main trail to access a particular bend of the Yellowstone River that I'd had good luck at in the past. As I was methodically working my way upstream, thoroughly covering each promising riffle and pool, I became aware that something felt off. The normal background singers of the wilderness, the birds, squirrels, and other critters, had gone utterly silent. An unnerving hush had fallen over the whole area. That's when I heard a loud crack, like a small tree branch being broken, just off to my right, somewhere in the thick lodgepole forest. I froze, straining my senses, but couldn't detect any other noises or movement. Against my better judgment, I resumed fishing for another 20 minutes or so. That's when an absolutely massive rock came crashing down from the steep slope above me, narrowly missing me as it thundered into the river. Can't describe the gut-wrenching shock and primal fear that shot through me in that moment. Whatever had dislodged that boulder was nothing I wanted to tangle with. Abandoning any thought of catching another trout, I quickly made my way back to the trail while constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched never left me that day. Then, just last year, I had what I can only describe as a face-to-face encounter while fishing along the western boundary of the park. I'll never forget the intense, guttural grunting I heard coming from just over a nearby rise. It was a deep, rumbling noise that immediately set every hair on my body standing on end. Fighting back panic, I slowly turned towards the source of the ungodly sound. That's when I saw it. Some kind of massive, hair-covered beast cresting the small hill only about 60 yards away. As it cleared the rise, we locked eyes, and I was utterly frozen in sheer terror. This creature was bigger than any grizzly, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, with a broad, powerfully built body covered in shaggy brown fur. Its face was hard to make out clearly through the trees, but I could see it had a sloped forehead and a protruding muzzle filled with formidable teeth. Those small, inscrutable eyes bored into me for what felt like an eternity. I was certain this was a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, and that I was staring my own death right in the face. Just when I thought I couldn't take the suspense any longer, the creature suddenly turned and bounded off back over the hill, crashing through the vegetation with unbelievable speed and power. I stood there for several minutes, trembling uncontrollably, as the realization washed over me. I had looked upon something that, by all accounts, shouldn't actually exist in this modern era. My life would never be quite the same. Since that day, I've decided to start hanging up my waders, at least when it comes to the particularly remote areas of the park. Yellowstone is a wonderland, but it's clear to me now that some things truly do go bump in those forests and mountains. Denizens far older and more primordial than we can possibly imagine. I was merely an unwitting intruder into their domain, and I got off with a simple warning. I'm just thankful that whatever safeguards or rules they follow allowed me to walk away that day and share this story. Ever since I was a young child, I felt a deep connection to the natural world that defied explanation. My parents told me I was an old soul and had wisdom beyond my years. Perhaps that was why the beings chose me that fateful night in Yosemite National Park when I was 8 years old. You see, my family has Native American ancestry tracing back to the Miwok tribe that lived in the Yosemite Valley area for thousands of years before European settlers arrived. We grew up hearing the ancient stories and legends passed down from our ancestors about supernatural events and encounters with beings not of this world. My great-grandmother was a renowned medicine woman and gifted seer within the tribe. She spoke of having visions from a young age and communing with spirits of nature and celestial realms. I showed similar intuitive abilities from the moment I could verbalize my thoughts as a toddler. I seemed to have an innate understanding of the cyclical patterns of the natural world, almost as if I could communicate with plants, animals, even the very rocks and trees themselves. My parents described me as having an otherworldly presence about me, which drew others to want to be in my energy. When we would go camping or hiking in the wilderness, I felt most at peace, one with the ancient landscape. My favorite place was Yosemite, with its towering granite monoliths, gushing glacial waterfalls, and diverse ecosystem teeming with life. I felt spiritually and energetically charged amidst those sacred lands where my ancestors had dwelled. It was during one of our camping trips to Yosemite in the summer of 1979, shortly before my 9th birthday, when my life changed forever. An encounter took place that validated the old stories and legends about star people and celestial beings watching over humanity. An experience that made me question the true nature of my existence and purpose on this earth. I was playing by our tent while my parents prepared dinner over the campfire. Suddenly, several strange-looking figures emerged from the trees just yards away. They were short and skinny, with large heads and eyes that seemed to glow. Their skin had a grayish tint that didn't look quite human. I froze in fear, my toys dropping from my hands as the strange beings approached. One of them pointed some kind of device at me, and then everything went black. The next thing I recall is waking up on a cold metal table inside what looked like a dimly lit room made of curved walls. More of those spindly gray figures surrounded me, seeming to examine me with intense curiosity. One of them placed some sort of helmet-like device on my head. It made a buzzing sound, and I suddenly felt incredibly sleepy. To this day, I'm unsure of what examinations or procedures they may have conducted on me in that alien environment. When I finally awoke, I was back in our tent trailer, with no indication that anyone else had witnessed my bizarre encounter. But the memories remain burned into my mind, and I've always wondered why they took me, and if I was somehow a part of their experimental studies. When I regained consciousness back in our tent trailer that night, I was disoriented and inexplicably exhausted. My parents thought I must have eaten something that didn't agree with me and let me sleep it off. Little did they know the cosmic event that had transpired. Over the following weeks and months, strange new abilities began manifesting within me. I experienced vivid dreams and astral projections, allowing me to voluntarily travel outside my physical body. Objects around me would occasionally move or levitate when I focused my energy. Plants seemed to respond to my touch, growing more vibrant and healthy. Neighborhood pets were drawn to me, as if they could sense I could telepathically communicate with them. My great-grandmother recognized these abilities right away and took me under her wing to nurture my blossoming psychic awareness. She explained that the star beings had activated my dormant higher consciousness and perception of multidimensional reality. My encounter was simply a catalyst to accelerate my spiritual awakening and embrace my true cosmic heritage. For the past 4 decades, I've dedicated my life to studying these enigmatic star beings and evolving the boundaries of my consciousness. While I may appear human, I now understand that I am a celestial being of incredible power and wisdom. My mission is to be a bridge between worlds, to help humanity realize our vast interplanetary ancestry and utmost potential to join our cosmic elders among the stars. Thank you for reading my story. By keeping an open mind to the mysteries of the universe, together we can elevate the human condition to new heights of awareness and reconnect with our cosmic origins. I'm a resident of Bozeman, Montana, and have been living here most of my life. In the summer of 2021, my family and I took a camping trip to Yellowstone National Park. It was in the evening when we had one of the strangest experiences. We were sitting around the campfire at the Bridge Bay campground when my son noticed a large, hairy, upright figure moving through the trees across the way. I quickly grabbed my binoculars to get a better look. It was reddish-brown in color and at least 7 feet tall, with extremely long arms. As it turned its head, I could have sworn I saw a protruding snout or muzzle. It seemed to be sniffing the air and looking around cautiously. We all just sat in stunned silence watching this thing navigate through the forest. At one point, it stopped and stared right at our campsite, letting out a spine-tingling howl or roar. It turned and continued lumbering away, disappearing behind some trees and boulders. We stayed awake most of the night, terrified it might come back. I've gone over it a million times in my head, but I know what I saw. It matched no known animal, at least not one that's supposed to exist these days. I'm still trying to make sense of the whole bizarre encounter. I spent a lot of time researching what we possibly could have seen that night in Yellowstone. The descriptions I came across of Bigfoot or Sasquatch creatures were certainly similar in terms of the massive size, hair-covered body, and ape-like features. But there was something almost prehistoric or ancient about this thing. The way it moved was just so unlike any bear or primate I've ever witnessed. It was larger than any grizzly and seemed to carry itself more upright and with a distinctly hominid-like gait. And that haunting vocalization, that bone-chilling roar or howl, I'll never forget it. It sounded almost supernatural or interdimensional in a way that still makes my skin crawl. Part of me wonders if we caught a glimpse of something that isn't meant to be seen in our modern world. Something left over from the primordial past or a reality adjacent to our own. Call me crazy, but the whole event had a really otherworldly, inexplicable aura about it that makes me question the barriers of our existence and perception of this physical plane we inhabit. Whatever we encountered, it has shaken me to my core and made me open up to the possibility that there are presences, entities, or even beings among us that defy our understanding of nature and science. Maybe it was some kind of multi-dimensional cryptid, or an ancient legacy race, or even an alienoid species that has remained completely under the radar. What really compounded the high strangeness of this encounter were the other inexplicable events that seemed to occur around the same time. Both before and after that chilling night, my family experienced a series of electrical malfunctions and dead batteries in our cameras, phones, and camping equipment that was extremely abnormal. Our camping neighbors even came over saying their RV had completely lost power, despite having been fully charged. We couldn't capture any video or photographic evidence of what we saw, where people encountered Sasquatch and had the same issues with electronics and magnetic fields, colored orbs dancing amidst the trees, hazy fog patches materializing out of nowhere despite clear skies. And on one occasion, I could have sworn I saw some sort of cloaked, mantis-like figure just observing us from a distance before vanishing into thin air. Whether my mind was playing tricks or I was getting a glimpse of other interdimensional phenomena, I'll never know. The strangeness didn't end there either. In the following weeks, I experienced episodes of insomnia, night terrors, and inexplicable shortness of breath, all classic signs of the Sasquatch sickness that some researchers describe. My wife claimed to have seen a large, dark apparition outside our bedroom window after we returned home. We've tried convincing ourselves it was merely Yellowstone's infamous bear activity playing tricks on us, but deep down, we know there was something more profoundly unsettling roaming those woods that we can't simply write off. Whether an ancient furred humanoid, an interdimensional traveler, or something inconceivably unknown, that fateful encounter has opened up an abyss of questions that will haunt me until I draw my last breath. I can't unhear that guttural, unearthly roar or unsee the mass of hair, teeth, and muscular extremities thrashing just ahead. Something profoundly unnerving and transcendent of our linear existence was out there amongst the untrailed forests of Yellowstone, and it has forever made me question the firmness of our reality. Sometimes I question the reality in which we're told is real. You should too. Thanks for reading and hearing me out. It was the summer of 1997, and my buddy Todd and I were camping deep in the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania. We had hiked miles off the main trails to find a really secluded spot near a creek. Everything was going great until around 3 a.m. on our second night. I was awoken by a horrendous, screaming howl that sounded nothing like a normal animal. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Todd shot upright in his sleeping bag with a terrified look on his face. The screams seemed to be coming from just outside our little camp area, maybe 50 yards away at most. Whatever was making those bone-chilling screams started crashing through the underbrush, smashing fallen branches and trees as it moved closer to our tent. We could hear its heavy footsteps striking the ground. Todd grabbed his rifle, but his hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure he'd be able to aim it. The crashing and screaming intensified as this thing closed in. Suddenly, it let out a deafening roar right behind the trees on the other side of the creek, maybe 30 feet from us. I'll never forget that raw, primordial sound. We sat there paralyzed, unable to move, just waiting for this nightmare creature to burst into our camp. For what felt like an eternity, whatever was out there paced back and forth, snapping branches and letting out these guttural growls. Just when I thought I couldn't take the suspense any longer, the sounds started moving away into the forest. The screams slowly faded into the distance until everything fell silent again. As soon as the sun came up, we didn't even bother packing our gear. We just grabbed our essentials and got the hell out of there as fast as we could. Whatever that beast was, it was no normal animal from these woods. I've spent my whole life camping, hiking, and hunting in the Alleghenies, and have never heard anything remotely like the roars and screams that came at us that night. They weren't the calls of any known wildlife, not bears, cougars, coyotes, or anything else. At first, I thought it might have been a rogue Sasquatch, since there's been plenty of Bigfoot sightings around these parts over the years. But even the most blood-curdling Sasquatch scream I've ever heard recordings of didn't compare to the ungodly, otherworldly shrieks that assaulted us. This was something different, something not of this world. The noises it made were so visceral and primordial, like they resonated at a frequency that penetrated my very core and activated some primal, deep-seated dread within my reptilian brain. Maybe it was some ancient forest demon or spirit awoken by our trespassing too far into its territory, or perhaps an interdimensional being that managed to slip into our reality through some sort of portal or gateway in those woods. All I know is nothing natural could have made those sounds. Even now, over 20 years later, I have nightmares about that night, of the creature finding us and revealing its true, unholy form. What makes the whole ordeal even more unsettling is that Todd and I weren't the only ones who encountered something strange in those woods that year. A couple months, some hikers reported finding massive footprints up in the Pine Creek Gorge area, footprints that certainly weren't made by any man. Then in late August, a group of campers swore they saw a large bipedal creature standing upright and watching them from the tree line across the river in the Tionesta area. They said it just silently stared at them for several minutes before turning and walking back into the forest on two legs. Perhaps most chilling of all was the supposed trail cam photo that surfaced online, supposedly taken by a hunter that fall in the Allegheny National Forest. I can't vouch for its authenticity, but the image showed some kind of grotesquely deformed humanoid creature lurking among the trees. Its body seemed contorted and unnatural, with elongated limbs and a disjointed stance. Eerily, it had these two protruding horns atop its head, and one single glowing eye in the center of its face. I'll admit that doctored photos and hoaxes have muddied the waters when it comes to anything paranormal or related to cryptids. But after what Todd and I experienced, after hearing those unearthly shrieks in the dead of night as something powerful and malicious stalked our camp, I'm now firmly convinced that something extraordinarily sinister lurks in the shadows of those woods, something that most sane people pray they'll never have to encounter themselves, an ancient, primordial evil that should have been left undisturbed and undiscovered. In 2012, I was 18 years old and had gone on a 10-day spiritual retreat in the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania. On the second night, an experience occurred that would change my perception of reality forever. I was deep in sleep in my tent when I awoke abruptly in the middle of the night. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a large head hovering over my sleeping bag. It was not human. The features were elongated and grotesque. Before I could react, I was surrounded by 3 of these wretched beings. One had gripped my left ankle and wrist, while another restrained my right side. They began dragging me out of the tent into the forest night. The next thing I can recall is being inside some kind of craft or structure. I was placed in a stiff metal chair in the center of a room, paralyzed but able to look around. In my periphery to the right was an ominous-looking machine with a cylindrical component that seemed to be focused on my head. As it inched closer, I felt a disturbing sensation as it appeared to enter my right ear canal. I can only describe it as feeling like I was being implanted or chipped. After that, my memory is blank until I awoke the next morning, back in my tent, with a single drop of blood in my right ear. The whole experience was utterly terrifying, and I have struggled to understand what happened to me during those missing hours in the deep woods of the Alleghenies. I can't be certain, but I have a nagging feeling that something sinister and not of this world violated me that night. I wish I had answers, but I may never know the truth. I experienced some extremely bizarre phenomena that I can't explain rationally. At least 3 times, I awoke in the middle of the night, paralyzed, with the same 3 grotesque beings surrounding me. However, on these occasions, they did not take me from my bedroom. They just observed me motionlessly for some time before disappearing into thin air. During this period, I also had recurring nightmares of being subjected to supplemental procedures on what felt like the same craft. Repulsive instruments were inserted into every orifice of my body, as the gray beings seemed to be studying my biological makeup. I would wake up in a cold sweat, terrified. Were these just dreams, or was my mind being pro as well? Perhaps most chilling of all, a presence began to manifest as an incessant, overwhelming feeling that I was being watched constantly. Everywhere I went, day or night, I could sense unseen eyes observing my every move. This feeling still persists over a decade later, leaving me paralyzed by paranoia at times. I have become hyper-aware of my surroundings, always looking over my shoulder. To this day, I do not know what commenced that night in the Allegheny woods, or why I was seemingly targeted. I have sought support from UFO researchers and anonymous online forums, but few can offer any rational explanations or guidance on coping with what I experienced. One thing is certain, my life and perception of reality has been forever tainted by that harrowing event. I have a strange encounter to share from my time camping in the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri last summer. My buddy Jeff and I were on a week-long backpacking trip, just getting away from it all. We've been hiking and camping together for years, but neither of us were prepared for what happened on our 4th night out there. We had set up camp near a quiet stream, the sounds of the flowing water and critters putting us at ease as we cooked dinner over the fire. Once it got dark, we climbed into the tent, swapping stories about past adventures. I'm not sure what time it was, but I awoke in the middle of the night to a bone-chilling howl outside. It didn't sound like a coyote or wolf. This was deeper, more guttural. Jeff was awake too, his eyes wide with fear. The howling continued, sometimes sounding far off, other times way too close for comfort. Suddenly, something huge slammed against the side of our tent. We froze, holding our breath, as heavy footsteps slowly circled us. Twigs snapped and leaves rustled as whatever it was moved around the tent. Jeff pulled out his pistol, whispering, "Get ready to run if it tries to get in." The footsteps faded into the distance after what felt like an eternity. Jeff and I were too shaken to fall back asleep, so we waited until first light to decamp and get the hell out of there as fast as we could. I can't explain what was out there prowling around our campsite that night. All I know is I've never heard anything like those terrifying howls before in my life. For a few weeks leading up to our camping trip, some of the people we spoke with around the Mark Twain National Forest had been talking about bizarre occurrences deeper in the woods. A couple of hunters claimed to have seen large bipedal creatures unlike anything they'd ever witnessed before. Some farmers found mutilated livestock carcasses with no apparent cause of death. I didn't put too much stock into the rumors at the time, but Jeff was adamant that we be extra cautious out there. On our third day in the forest, we started finding tracks that seemed too large and distinct to be from any typical animal. The prints were basically human-like footprints, but easily over 16 inches long. We tried convincing ourselves they must be bear tracks, but they just looked all wrong. That same night around the campfire, we heard disturbing howls and shrieks carrying through the woods. The sounds echoed and reverberated, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. Jeff figured it was exotic animals from a traveling circus or something, but I thought it sounded more intelligent, like nothing I've ever heard in nature before. I've tried to rationalize what kind of creature or being could have been responsible. The basics are that it was clearly bipedal, had the ability to move silently despite what must have been an enormous size, and made vocalizations unlike anything found in nature. At first, I wondered if it was some sort of undiscovered species of wild human ancestor, like the tales of wild men or skunk apes. But the more I've looked into those legends, the more I realize our encounter seemed to defy natural laws completely. For one, the howls and shrieks emanating from the forest didn't seem to have a singular point of origin. It was as if the unearthly sounds were surrounding us from all directions, reverberating in a supernatural way. And when the huge thing was circling our tent, it felt less like a physical presence and more like an oppressive, evil force of nature creeping in. At one point, I could have sworn I saw Jeff's shadow on the tent wall had more than just 2 arms or legs, like something else was reaching toward us. Maybe I'm just trying to make sense of the senseless, but I've become convinced we experienced something far beyond a night terror or mere undiscovered beast that night. The more time passes, the more it replays in my mind as a brush with the unknown, an ancient, malicious entity or energy that calls those deep, secluded forests home, something that wants to be sure those black woods stay avoided. I know it sounds crazy, like the ramblings of someone who's lost their mind, but you didn't see the fear in Jeff's eyes as he clutched that pistol, hear those unholy howls that raised every hair on my body, or feel the dread of something you can't quite comprehend circling your flimsy nylon shelter. Maybe it's better that way, to not know what's out there, lurking in the dark recesses. I was camping with my wife and teenage son in the Sheka-Mejon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin last August. We've been avid hikers and campers for years, but what we experienced during this trip has left us shaken to the core. It was around 10 p.m. on our second night. That's when we heard a strange sound, sort of a deep guttural groaning coming from the dense tree line about 50 yards away. My son thought it might be a large animal like a bear, but it didn't sound quite right to me. As we sat in silence, straining to hear more, an absolutely massive figure emerged from the trees. It was at least 8 feet tall, with a thin, humanoid body covered in a leathery dark skin. But the most chilling part were the huge, ragged wings that extended from its back, giving it a span of what looked like 12-15 feet across. The creature slowly lumbered closer, those wings drooping low, seemingly weighing it down. We were frozen in terror as it neared the edge of the firelight. That's when I noticed its head, or lack of one. It seemed to just have a seamless transition from shoulders to the top of its torso. It stopped about 30 feet from our campsite and almost seemed to be studying us. We didn't dare move a muscle. It simply turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing from our sight. Words can't describe the wave of relief coupled with dread that washed over us then. We quickly broke camp, threw our gear into car, and got the hell out of there. I've spent countless nights in the wilderness, but I've never experienced anything as terrifying as that winged monstrosity. Oh, and I wanted to say, in the days preceding that fateful night, there were signs that something wasn't quite right in those woods. Strange, unexplained sounds echoed through the forest after nightfall. One evening, while hiking back to our campsite, we spotted a series of massive footprints pressed into the loamy soil, each easily 16 inches long. We didn't know what to make of it at the time, but it unnerved us. So we began taking extra precautions, keeping our food particles and anything with an odor sealed up tight, making sure to douse the campfire completely before bed. Looking back, maybe those were warnings from whatever ruled that forgotten place, a primal presence letting us know we were crossing territory we didn't belong. As for the creature itself, I left out some of the more disturbing details in my initial recounting. Its body was gaunt to the point of seeming emaciated. The dark, leathery skin stretched taut over its skeletal frame. The wings were raw-boned and ropey, with a battered, weathered look to them. Perhaps most unsettling of all were the hands. While its feet were more like a cloven hoof, the hands were long and spindly with hooked talons, grasping and flexing as it moved closer to the firelight, turkey-like wrists jutting out from the main body, twisting unnaturally. It was as if the creature's very form defied nature. It didn't just lurch or plod like you might expect from something so massive. Instead, its gait was fluid and light-footed, almost like it was gliding across the ground despite its tremendous size and bulk. At one point, a cloud briefly parted, allowing the full moon to illuminate the clearing and the winged being within it. That's when I caught a glimpse of its eyes, or what appeared to be eyes. 2 points of burning crimson peered out from the shadowy recess where its head should have been. Penetrating, intelligent, perhaps even sentient. It felt less like the mindless driving instinct of a beast and more like the studied examination of a living mind. Deep down, I knew we weren't simply being assessed as potential prey. This thing could see into us in a way I can't fully comprehend. It was weighing our very souls in that moment. Even my skeptical son went pale, unable to tear his gaze away from that fathomless, baleful stare. After having some distance from this paradigm-shattering experience, I've tried to make sense of what we saw. Was it a long-forgotten aberrant life form? A living gargoyle or demon given flesh and wing? Some offshoot branch of humanoid evolution? Or could it have been something not of this world, an entity slipping into our reality through a tear in the veil? I don't have any answers, only the lingering questions that may corrode my sanity if I dwell too long. All I know is that something grotesquely unnatural stalks the lightless wood of Shekamegan Nicolay, and it's quite fortunate we were deemed unworthy of its full attention that night. I've given up trying to rationalize it. Any answers are greatly appreciated. Thanks. My son-in-law and his two brothers were fishing in the late evening. One of them noticed a black object floating on the water, perhaps 100 feet away from their boat. It was hard to tell exactly what it was until they got closer. When they did, it began rising out of the lake at an incredible speed. It reached about 50 feet above the surface before my son-in-law had time to grab a camera phone and snap one picture, which unfortunately turned out very blurry. At that point, he described seeing arms that looked like metal rods extending from each side up towards the sky with flashing red lights on both ends. The light blinked several times before becoming solid for about 3 seconds, then returning to blinking mode again as if in rapid succession. That's when an ear-piercing screech filled the air around them. It sounded unlike anything they had ever heard before. A combination of nails on a chalkboard and a wild animal's roar. The object seemed to almost convulse with each reverberating screech. My son-in-law said he could feel the sound vibrating in his chest. His brothers were frozen in fear, unable to start the boat or even speak. The screeching stopped abruptly. In that stillness, the rods retracted back into the black object and it began descending back towards the lake, picking up speed until it splashed down, sending up a massive spray of water. They quickly started the boat and tore out of there as fast as they could. To this day, they have no idea what it was they encountered on that dark lake, but they've never fished that spot again. I should mention that this encounter happened in the area surrounding Chequamegon Nicolay National Forest in northern Wisconsin, not far from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That whole region is renowned for having a hugely disproportionate number of UFO sightings and unexplained phenomena reported over the years. My son-in-law was fishing on the Chippewa Flowage, which is a man-made lake created by damming up a section of the Chippewa River that runs through the heart of the national forest. Locals and native tribes have long warned of strange happenings in those woods, from inexplicable lights in the night sky to explorers going missing without a trace for years at a time, before turning up confused and rambling about alien abductions. 2 months before my son-in-law's terrifying experience, a couple claimed to have spotted a massive triangular craft hovering over some trees near the lake's eastern shore. They described intense, swirling lights and said the thing must have been hundreds of feet wide. Then, just last year, a group of college kids camping in the forest recorded footage of weird ethereal clouds forming geometric patterns and colors that definitely didn't seem natural. So you can certainly understand why my son-in-law and his brothers were so shaken by whatever the hell that thing was. They saw rising out of the Chippewa Flowage that night. The national forest and all the lakes and rivers around it have been a paranormal hotspot for as long as anyone can remember. Which is why, whatever they encountered, despite how utterly bizarre and unexplainable, wasn't entirely surprising given the area's history of high strangeness. It was about 30 years ago, in the early 1990s. My family had a cabin in the Manistee National Forest where we would spend a few weeks each summer. This particular year, I was there with my husband and our 2 young daughters, who were 8 and 10 at the time. One evening, the girls had been playing outside and came rushing into the cabin, wide-eyed and out of breath. They said they heard a scary noise in the woods, something like a howling dog, but much stranger and more frightening. I assumed it must have been a coyote, or maybe even a wolf, and tried to calm them down, telling them it was just a wild animal and nothing to worry about. After dinner, I stepped outside to have a cigarette on the porch. The sun was setting and the forest was getting dark. Suddenly, I heard the sound myself, a bizarre, almost unearthly howling or screaming noise coming from the trees behind our cabin. It sounded vaguely like a distressed dog, but there was something very unnatural and eerie about it. I called out to my husband to come listen. We stood there in silence, straining our ears. A few minutes later, we heard it again. We decided to go investigate and try to see what was making the weird sound. We grabbed flashlights and cautiously walked to the edge of the woods. The sun had fully set now, and the forest was pitch black beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. We took a few steps in and played the beams around, looking for eyeshine or any movement. After a minute, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I swung my light to the left, and there, about 30 yards away, I saw a large dark figure moving between the trees. My heart leapt into my throat. The shadowy figure was upright and looked to be about 7 feet tall, but it didn't move like a person. It prowled forward with an odd gait, slightly hunched. I still remember the chilling feeling when my flashlight beam landed on it and 2 glowing red eyes flashed back at me before it turned and disappeared into the darkness. In that brief moment, I got the impression of a wolf-like head, a protruding muzzle, and a furry body with a powerful build. It sounds crazy to say it, but the first thing that popped into my terrified mind was werewolf. We hurried back to the cabin, locked the door, and I spent a nervous night hoping that thing wouldn't come snooping around. The next day, we decided to cut our vacation short and head home. I've never told many people this story because it sounds so far-fetched. I mean, a werewolf in the Michigan woods, but I know what I saw and heard that night. It was no dog or coyote or bear. I've spent a lot of nights outdoors and seen plenty of wildlife. This was something else. To this day, I still get goosebumps when I think about those glowing red eyes staring back at me in the darkness. I've kept tabs on the dogman sightings in Michigan over the years, and a lot of the descriptions match what I saw. The upright posture, the wolf-like head and snout, the reddish eye shine. I don't know if I believe in werewolves, but I'm convinced there's something strange lurking in the forest that defies explanation. I've never gone back to our cabin. As much as I love the woods, that experience shook me enough to keep me away. I sure wouldn't want to run into that creature again. I've been debating whether or not to share this story, but after reading through some of the posts here, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. This happened about 3 years ago when I was camping with a few friends in the Olympic National Forest. We had hiked pretty deep into the forest, wanting to get away from the more populated campgrounds. We found a spot near a river and set up camp for the night. Everything was going fine until around midnight when we started hearing this strange sound coming from the woods. It was hard to describe, but it sounded almost like a baby crying. We all looked at each other, wondering if someone had brought an infant camping. But then the crying changed, becoming more guttural and animalistic. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. We huddled together by the fire, trying to ignore the sound. But then we heard something moving in the underbrush, circling our campsite. But whenever we shined our flashlights into the woods, we couldn't see anything. This went on for hours. The crying sound and the movement in the woods. As soon as the sun started to rise, we packed up our gear and got the hell out of there. I've been trying to rationalize what we heard that night. Could it have been some kind of animal? A mountain lion or a bear maybe? But I've never heard any animal make a sound like that before. and the way it moved through the woods without us ever catching a glimpse of it, it just didn't feel natural. I started looking into local legends and folklore, trying to find an explanation. That's when I came across stories of skinwalkers. From what I've read, they're known for making all sorts of strange sounds, from animal noises to human voices, and they're said to be able to move through the woods without being seen. I'm not saying for certain that what we encountered was a skinwalker, but I can't think of any other explanation that fits. Has anyone else had a similar experience in the Olympic National Forest or heard stories of skinwalkers in that area? I'm really trying to make sense of what happened that night. I decided to reach out to my cousin, who's an avid hunter and knows the Olympic National Forest pretty well. I figured if anyone might have some insight into what we experienced, it would be him. When I told him about the strange sounds and the feeling of being watched, he got really quiet. Then he said, "I think you might have encountered a Wendigo." I was surprised, as I thought Wendigos were more of an East Coast or Midwest legend, but he told me that he's heard stories of them in the Pacific Northwest too. He said that a few years back, he was out hunting in a remote part of the forest when he had a similar experience. He was camped out near a creek when he started hearing this weird echoing howl. He said it sounded like a mix between a wolf and a human scream. He spent the whole night on edge, his rifle at the ready. He kept hearing movement in the woods around him, but he never saw anything. The next morning, he found strange tracks near his campsite. They looked almost human, but with long, claw-like toes. He's been hunting in those woods his whole life and never saw tracks like that before. He started asking around, and that's when he heard the stories about Wendigos. Apparently, there have been sightings going back decades, always in the most remote parts of the forest. He thinks that might be what my friends and I encountered, a Wendigo stalking us through the night. He said we were lucky to make it out of there unscathed. Apparently, Wendigos are known for their insatiable hunger and their ability to mimic human voices to lure people into the woods. I'm not sure what to believe at this point. A skinwalker, a Wendigo, or something else entirely. All I know is that there's something strange and dangerous lurking in the Olympic National Forest. I've been camping and hiking all my life, but I've never experienced anything like that before. I'm just glad my friends and I made it out okay. If you're planning on camping in the Olympic National Forest, be careful and stay alert. There's more out there than just bears and mountain lions. I was out for a walk one day in the dense woods near Mount Rainier National Park. As I trekked along the trail, I noticed something massive moving through the trees ahead of me. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear, but as I got closer, I realized this was no ordinary creature. It stood easily 7 feet tall, towering over me, with long arms and legs covered in shaggy dark hair from head to toe. Its face looked vaguely human-like, with large, deep-set eyes under a heavy brow ridge. As soon as it noticed my approach, which took just seconds, we both froze dead still, staring at each other in total silence from about 50 feet apart for what felt like an eternity. Then, all hell broke loose. The creature suddenly took off running towards a thick patch of brush nearby, letting out sounds I've never heard before from any man or animal. Those who have reported similar encounters describe it as a sort of barking or grunting, but this voice had a shrill, rough quality unlike anything natural. It was like someone trying their hardest not to yell or scream out of sheer excitement. I couldn't quite place the emotion behind it. I stood there dumbfounded as the creature disappeared into the thick vegetation, the guttural noises continuing for a few more seconds until an eerie silence returned to the forest. There are no trails leading into that brush-choked area, as most hikers steer clear of those strange, overgrown parts of the woods out of simple primal fear of what might be lurking within. Everything about its massive size, towering height of around 7 feet, the ape-like covering of long, shaggy hair, and those unmistakable human-esque facial features all match the classic descriptions of Bigfoot from indigenous tales and dozens of other credible eyewitness accounts over the decades. Then there were the vocalizations, those guttural primal barks and grunts that transcended any known animal language. So many people who have heard similar sounds from these cryptids describe it as hauntingly unnatural, almost paranormal in a sense, as if whatever made them was something not of this world. The way it reacted to my presence was very characteristic of the highly intelligent but reclusive behavior associated with Sasquatch as well. We locked eyes for a tense moment, both unmoving and silent, trying to sense if the other posed a threat. Then it simply turned and loped away with that strange grace that makes the massive beasts seem almost supernatural. Of course, I can't claim with 100% certainty that's what it was, but I've always been a skeptic of these wild forest giant myths and legends, until I came face to face with something that checked all the boxes. Now, I'm a reluctant believer in the possibility that Bigfoot may be more than just a fantastical tale around these woods. Stranger still was the stench that followed after it had lumbered away into the brush, an overwhelming putrid odor like decaying meat and excrement wafted through in its wake, so pungent and foul that it literally made my eyes water and stomach churn. Yet as abruptly as that smell arrived, it vanished within a few seconds, as if a mystical force had cleared the air. Perhaps most chilling of all were the impressions its footsteps left behind. When I cautiously made my way over to inspect the area where it had been standing, I found a series of remarkably deep and well-defined indentations in the hard forest floor. Each print was easily 16 inches long and appeared much too flat and well-tapered to come from anything resembling a bear or other four-legged creature. What do you think? And exactly that, I want to know what you guys think, not just of that last encounter, but of all the strange experiences. Go ahead and leave your comments and thoughts down below on these strange stories in today's episode. And if you guys made it this far into the woods, I want you to leave a comment down below specifically that says strange things in our national forests. So that way I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy content like this, where we're talking about strange, unidentified phenomena happening in our national forest and parks, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for more, and enjoy this great new series I have coming that explores all things in our national parks and forests. With that said, I will see you all in the next episode.